And as she was talking, like the whole time I was just super starry-eyed and I was like, oh my God, how can I be like this woman? Like she's amazing. Like she has the dream job, like working for 17. Wow. And so after she got off the stage, something just literally came over me. And I literally saw at some point that she went to the bathroom and I followed her into the bathroom. And I was just like pretending that I had to wash my hands and I was just happened to be there at the sink and she was there next to me. And we just started talking and I was like, I'm actually going to be moving to New York after graduation. I'm going to be at the New York Daily News. I would love to, if you would consider having coffee with me sometime. She gave me her business card. Fast forward, when I moved to New York, I followed up. We ended up having lunch, and she kind of became like a mentor to me. And at one point, there was an internship opening at Oprah Magazine, and that it's owned by the same company as 17. So I reached out and I was like, hey, I applied for this. If there's any way you could put in a good word, I'd really appreciate it, which she did. And, I'll never know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that helped get my resume to the top of the pile. And I ended up getting an internship at Oprah Magazine, which literally kickstarted my whole like media career.
Welcome to the Chingona Revolution podcast, where we will bring out your inner badass Latina, overcome self-doubt, help you gain clarity, and pave your own path, all while leading with courage. I am your host, Latina coach and speaker, Erica Cruz. Arianna Davis, welcome to Chingona Revolution podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. Ever since you and I got to really kiki in Puerto Rico, I've been so excited for this. So I'm ready.
Yes. I was actually reflecting on this yesterday when I was walking my dog because I was thinking about what I wanted this conversation to be. And I was just reflecting on, I really believe that the universe kept trying to bring us together because we were both at We All Grow. You were doing a book signing. I was speaking for storytellers. And then we both saw each other in New York for the travel fest, the Latinx travel fest. And we briefly spoke there, but didn't really connect. And it wasn't until we were in Puerto Rico at the Money Our Power conference when we really got to know each other. All the chisme from my life. We had the tea circle when we would share like chisme and different things like that. And then the amazing dinners that we shared. So I really feel like the universe was trying to bring us together many times. And it wasn't until Puerto Rico that we actually were able to really sync up. And I mean, I've been an admirer for a long time. And even I was more familiar with your book before I actually had met you in person.
There she is.
I love it. Yeah. So I'm just so excited for this conversation. And I really do feel like we were meant to meet. So let's jump into this because I have so many amazing questions for you. And I'm sure that based on our conversation, I'm just going to have additional questions. But can you give us a little bit of background to so who was little Arianna? Like when you were a child, tell us a little bit about that because we see you as this badass chingona who's on the Today Show and who was leading a huge team at the Oprah magazine and all of these different, amazing accomplishments. But tell us a little bit about who you were when you were younger.
I love this question because when I think about little Arianna, I just get very emo because, little Arianna was definitely, I don't think she would even be able to believe like the things that I'm doing now because I grew up really extremely shy. Like I was like one of those kids that like my parents had to tell me to speak up to adults because I always would get like very shy. And I think a lot of that came from I grew up in Maryland. I grew up like in the suburbs right outside of Baltimore. And my dad is Black, he's African American, and my mom is Puerto Rican. So I grew up mixed kid in the suburbs of Maryland, and I was the middle child. So I was just kind of like the shy bookworm who was always like a little bit of the nerd and like the different kid at school. But the one thing about that and kind of feeling other is that I always was drawn to like just escape in books. And I was a huge bookworm, a huge reader. And that led me to wanting to write. And so when I was like 8 years old, I wrote my first little chapter book that I wrote for my mom. It was about like a skeleton and a monster who become best friends. But it's funny because I'm like, I just feel I feel very blessed that since I was literally probably around 8 years old, I think I've just always known my calling and felt like something within me drew me to like writing and words. And so, yeah, that was me as like a little girl, just a little bit shy, a little bit nerdy, and someone who was just like always had her nose in a book.
And what kind of books were you drawn to?
I think that's a good question. I mean, at that age, I loved The Babysitter's Club. That was like my jam. I love that. And I've always really loved fiction. I've always just loved stories that like helped me to escape. But I think that the biggest thing that like also really drew me to wanting to write was that one thing I think I noticed until it wasn't until I got a little bit older and I started to discover authors like Sandra Cisneros or like Toni Morrison, that I always felt like even with reading something like The Babysitter's Club as a kid, I would have to rewire my brain to imagine that the characters could look like me because most characters and most authors didn't look like me. So I think that was like one of the things that as I got older, I started to feel really passionate about what would it be like if someone who looked like me could write these books, or if some of the characters in these books, were Black or Latino or, mixed like me. So I've always been drawn to fiction and just this idea of just getting lost in another world. But I think the thing that I really realized as I gotten older is I would love to experience reading books like that, but with people who look a little more like me.
Yeah, definitely. And this was one of the last questions I had for you, but as you're talking about fiction, you're in the middle of writing a novel, right?
Mm, I am. Yeah, I've been working on a novel pretty much since the pandemic. I would say during the pandemic and not long after the world started to open up again, I got 70% of the way through like my first manuscript, and then, life happened and I got a new job, and so but I'm almost done working on my first drafts and I want to start shopping it around. So hopefully like maybe by the end of this year I'll be able to see what happens next. But yeah, it's been really fun, and my first book is nonfiction, What Would Frida Do? So it was like a whole different experience than just like writing something completely from my imagination. But that's
Yeah.
always been my first love is fiction.
Okay, great. So the last question I had for you was, you're working on a novel. How exciting. What is the difference between writing something like a self-help biography book, right? Or it's almost like history self-help and then a novel. So what is that difference? So what are you from the writer's perspective? Is your process different? So just shine a little bit of light on that for us.
It's totally different. It's been really interesting because so Frida, What Would Frida Do? Guide to Living Boldly, which is my first book. Frida kind of fell into my lap. The process of that book, happening in my life, I really feel like it was God because I had at the time just started my job as the digital director for Oprah magazine. So I was literally from the ground up launching a website for the magazine. It was a really crazy time in my life. I was working like crazy. And then out of nowhere, I get an email from an agent who reached out and said that she was working with a publisher who was interested in publishing something fresh and new about the life of Frida, because there were like so many people post about her on social media. Her quotes are everywhere. There's still murals about her, but people don't necessarily of this generation totally know the story of what a badass she was. So they were asking around if anyone knew of any writers who might be interested in something like that. And an old colleague of mine was like, you have to talk to Arianna Davis. She is like a Frida super fan. So I always say, I think it's just so funny that I had this like reputation on the streets as being like a Frida super fan, but it's true. So, an agent reached out and she was like, if you have any ideas, if you would be interested in writing something about Frida, let's talk. So that was how like that whole kind of Frida book came to be. I was like, if I'm going to write something, I don't want to write just another biography because so many have been written about her. There's a movie starring Selma Hayek about her. So I wanted it to be like part biography, but also hopefully something that was a little bit more fresh. So I literally just shared, in addition to a very well researched, straightforward biography, like the lessons that I've learned on how to live a bold life from this amazing, badass woman. So for me, that book was like, there was definitely a lot of creativity involved, and I definitely put my own spin on it. And I went to Mexico City and did some writing and research while I was there, which was like my favorite part of the whole process. But ultimately, it was a lot of research and it was a lot of just like reading everything I could get my hands on versus fiction. It's literally just like you're sitting in front of your laptop and it's just your brain and it's whatever you're coming up with. And my process it's like it's up to me what I want my process to look like versus researching and outlining and like getting all the details and fact checking myself. It's like a completely different world.
Yeah, definitely. So we're so in alignment right now because my question for you was going to be, why did you write What Would Frida Do? But you already answered
Sorry,
it.
I'm like skipping ahead of all your questions.
No, it's all good. I love it. I love it. So let me ask this other question. Who is What Would Frida Do for? Who should pick up this book? And actually, wait, before you answer it, I was out with my friends at brunch. This must have been not even a year ago. It was earlier this year. And maybe it was before you and I saw each other in New York, but we went to go have brunch and we didn't have reservations. So of course we had to wait. And there was a bookstore next door and we were like, well, let's go there. And as we're walking around, your book is on the counter and my cousin and I are just drawn to it. And my cousin was like, I feel called to buy this book. So she bought the book and And then whenever I like walked into her house, I forgot she had bought the book when we were together. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just met her at a conference. She was like, wait, you were with me when I bought it. I was like, you're right. So I'm telling you, I feel like your book had been speaking to me even before. So, and then another friend just posted a photo of your book. She had no idea that you and I even knew each other. And she's, this was such a good read. And I was like, I'm
Oh,
interviewing her on Thursday.
that
So
makes
yeah, I just want to tell you that you are, I mean, I'm sure you hear this all the time, but like you still get to hear it from me. You are such a talented writer. Like it really felt like I was there
thank you.
with you in Mexico City when you were writing this book, when
Oh.
you were at brunch and Frida kept popping up everywhere. And you really do have a gift of writing. And I'm just like very happy that your parents were supportive of you following this career and that you've ended up in the path that you've ended up. So
Oh,
kudos to
thank
you.
you. That gives me like goosebumps, especially because, one of the things that I always acknowledge is that I do think I'm really lucky that I had those parents because there was definitely a time when my parents were like, are you sure you don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer? Like writers don't make money, journalists don't make money. And I think that's true in a lot of, Latino and like minority households. Like I think our parents tend to kind of really push us down the path of what's going to make you money. But I
Yeah.
think eventually my parents really just saw like this girl since day one has just loved, this like art of writing and reading and anything with words. So they were really supportive of me. But, it wasn't always easy because not a lot of people look like us, who are either authors or who are writers or who are journalists. So you're so right that it's a privilege. And I'm very blessed that my parents were supportive.
And you can't deny the talent you have for it as well. So
Oh,
kudos
thank
to you. And who is this book for? Because I asked the question and then I went on a whole
we went on a tangent. So honestly, I definitely think the book is for it could be for if you're a Frida fan and like you love her, I think that you'll enjoy the book because hopefully you'll relate to just, the fact that I'm a fan. And so I'm sharing a lot of the things that I love about her and some of the lessons I've learned and that I think we can all learn from her. But I also think it's also for people like there's so many people who tell me that they had no idea who Frida was, or they only knew, oh, she's that artist with the unibrow, or like they kind of maybe remembered seeing the
yeah.
movie, but they didn't really know, who feel like they learned a lot from just getting to know her story. So I would say it's for anyone who's like in need of a little bit of a dose of inspiration or creativity and or anybody who just loves Frida and loves anything Frida wants just a little bit more.
Love it. So you talk about how we can learn confidence through Frida. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Frida and the person she was and her legacy has helped you tap into confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that every time I think about Frida, even still like years removed now from having written this book, I just think about the fact that this was a woman, she was Mexican, she didn't call herself queer because we didn't have the same language and labels at that time, but she was, for all intents and purposes, was a queer woman. She was married to an artist who was like world renowned, and she at that time was a nobody. This was way before the feminism movement, way before all these things. But in the 1920s, she's, out here talking about things like, her political beliefs. She's painting about the fact that she experienced a miscarriage and telling her story and her pain. She's doing interviews with one of my favorite Frida stories is she was getting off of, I think she was getting off of a plane with Diego, her husband, who was like, the famous artist at the time. He was world renowned. And so the interviewer was like, what's it like to be married to Diego? And she was like, yeah, Diego's fine, but it is I who am the great artist. And whenever I think about that and I think about here was this like 29-year-old young Mexicana, like in the 1928, 29, who had the balls to say something like that to a reporter. I just feel like every time I think about her and just how far ahead of her time she was, how bold she was, the fact that she just did not care, didn't care about what society had to say about her based on who she was or where she was from, and just was her most authentic self. That's what always really inspires me and just reminds me like if Frida at that time, given all the obstacles that life had thrown her way, could be that confident and that bold, then what's stopping any of the rest of us?
Love it. Oh, that's so, so good. I have such a random question. Do you ever dream with Frida?
Oh yeah. I
Does
mean,
she live with you in your dreams?
I used to a lot more, especially when I was writing the book. I think that there was a point where it was just like my whole life was Frida. It got to the point where now it's gotten to the point where I've had to just like gently tell my friends and family, I don't need anything else Frida. Like I'm like ever like I have Frida earrings, Frida, totes and posters, and I like literally I have a lot of Frida in my life, but
Yeah.
especially when I was working on the book, she was like, I would just be dreaming about scenes that I was writing or like things that I had read and like different biographies about her. And it's my whole brain for a while there was definitely Frida, even when I was sleeping.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I bet. I bet. So let's switch gears a little. We'll move away from Frida. I'm just curious now about just the process of writing a book. So I run a program called Courage Driven Latina where people take action on something that they've been wanting to do. And for a lot of people, that's starting a business. For other people, that is dating after a divorce. And for at this point, about five, like a handful of my clients have either already written books or they have a desire to write a book. So, with these clients that I have, what advice do you have? So, I have two questions under this category. What advice do you have for somebody who is struggling to finish a book and staying accountable?
I definitely think this is important because people talk about writing as this beautiful act, but at the end of the day, nothing gets written if you don't have yourself on some type of schedule. And so I definitely think you have to think about how you can stay accountable. So for me, one of the things I did with this novel, because it is fiction and I wasn't on a deadline, with Frida, I had a deadline. So I had a book deal, I had a publisher that was like checking in and was like, hey, we need this by XYZ date. So like when you have a deadline, when you have something to keep you accountable, it's a lot easier to kind of be like, okay, I don't feel like writing, but I have to because I have a deadline, or I'm not going to get my book advance back, or I'm not going to make the publishing date, or whatever it is. But if you're just writing a book, either because it's fiction or you're deciding that you want to self-publish something, I think you just have to kind of give yourself your own goals and just figure out little things that are going to help you stay accountable. So like one thing I did with the novel was that like for the new year, I was like, okay, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to finish this manuscript and I want to, get this book out this year. That's my goal. But for me, it was like just like finding the time. So I decided to give myself a 30-day writing challenge. And I was like, for 30 days, I have to write at least for an hour every single day for 30 days straight. Just gave myself that deadline. And then whatever happens after that, it happens after that. But I will at least know that for 1 month straight, I found the time to write every single day. There's a newsletter that's great it's called 1000 Days of Summer. Sorry, 1000 Words of Summer. And this newsletter, it was like for 2 weeks, every single day, you have to write 1,000 words, even whether it ended up being in your book or not, or whatever ended up happening to it. And so I joined that with a friend of mine, and we were kind of each other's accountability partners. And every single day, like there were days where I was working really late and it would get late, and I would just be like, you know what? I think I'm gonna just sit on the couch and watch Vanderpump Rules instead of writing. And then she would text me and be like, hey, girl, I just finished writing. Like, how's your 1,000 words coming? That's when I'd be like, shit, like she did it. Now I have to. So I definitely think having an accountability partner also helps and kind of goes a long way. But even outside of like challenges and accountability partners, I think that thinking about when you feel like you're at your best as either a writer or creator, or like you feel like you have your best energy, if that's in the morning or if that's at night, like whatever time it is, just trying to find windows of time where you can make yourself just be accountable and say, okay, for 1 week straight, every morning I'm going to write. Like no matter what happens, like I'm going to have this like scheduled time. Because otherwise, I think it can be kind of hard to just like,
Yeah, if we wait for like creativity to hit or to feel inspired, we will not get things done. So I think there's
1000%.
there's a difference between allowing, I think that discipline has gotten a really bad rep with this idea of hustle culture, but there's a difference between hustling and being disciplined.
Mhm.
And what I've learned is we tend to have more, if we're disciplined and structured, we tend to have more ease and freedom in other areas of our life instead
Yep.
of just, sitting on the couch when you're probably sitting on the couch thinking about those words, right? It's
Yeah.
not even like you're enjoying your time on the couch. You're like, oh man, I still need to write today.
Yeah, exactly. No, 100%. And I think the romantic idea is that, okay, inspiration will strike and then I'll just be at my computer and all the words will come to me. But life doesn't happen that way, especially if writing a book or writing is like your side hustle, or it's something that you want to do in addition to if you're a mom, or if you have a day job, or, all of the many responsibilities that we have, and also I think another really important thing for me is I always either put my phone in another room while I'm writing, or I put it on airplane mode. Or another thing that when I was doing my little 30-day challenge that I did for myself, I literally recorded myself while I was like writing and did like a time lapse. And because I was like, one day I'll make a TikTok about this or something, which I haven't done yet. But I was like, one day I'll have all this great footage of the 30 days straight that I spent writing. And then it was because I was recording myself, I literally couldn't touch my phone. So I think also in the social media era and like the era of being addicted to our phones, I think also unplugging completely while you're like focusing on writing goes a long way.
Yes, I could agree. I Couldn't agree with that more. I think especially when you are running businesses or a lot of your brand requires social presence, it's easy to justify, oh, I'm just going to go respond to a DM or do this. But the moment you open your phone, it's kind of like when you walk into the kitchen and you're like, what did I come in here for? Phones are so distracting that even if you have an intention for opening your phone, chances are you're going to go down a rabbit hole. So it's best to just keep your hands away.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the other question I have for you about, I have another client. So one of them is having a hard time with accountability. So thank you. Another question that I have is, what advice would you have for somebody who already has published a book and they've self-published and now they're at the stage where they're like, what do I do with this? How do I promote this? How do I tell people?
Yeah, so it's so interesting that, the world of like self-publishing. I would say, I mean, I definitely think that obviously social media is your friend. So as much as you can I think that the best, the best like tool that we have, I think when it comes to reading and books is word of mouth. So I think that the more that you can definitely, I would say, even if it means sending free copies to like people that influencers, getting people to post about it. I think really tapping into social media, look at Colleen Hoover. If you're listening to this and you're not familiar, Colleen Hoover, she wrote It Ends With Us, which is, best-selling novel. She has, I think, 8 out of the top 20 New York Times best-selling novels right now. And she started out by self-publishing, and literally her audience just kind of grew because of, I think, Reddit and just kind of different fan boards and stuff like that. And then eventually she just kind of through word of mouth got so many people interested in her books that like a publisher reached out and they offered to like officially publish it. And that's when she finally blew up. But it's interesting because she's really kind of changed the way that people think about book publishing, which is like people used to think, oh, you had to have a book deal and that was the only way to go about it. But now I think because of Instagram and TikTok and just the fact that people care less about, oh, I found this on a bookshelf in a bookstore, more about like somebody posted about this on TikTok and they said that they couldn't put it down and it was amazing and it changed their lives. I think that word of mouth currency is a lot more valuable now. So I would definitely say that word of mouth and tapping into social media is a really great place to start.
Yes, I can second that because I have a friend who wrote a book called Why Not Chica. It's all about manifesting. And when I was consistently posting on TikTok, guilty, I have stopped posting on TikTok too. Now I'm running a business, it gets busy. But when I was consistently posting on TikTok, I created a video with 3 books every chingona needs to read. This is before the podcast even existed. Apparently, I've been using this word for a long time. And the video went pretty viral. I think it ended up with over 300,000 views or something like that. And that was one of the books that I recommended. And my friend sent me an email from her publisher that said, hey, did you do any speaking engagements or TV segments? Because the sales from your book just spiked up. And my friend was like, it was your TikTok video that went viral. And I was like, oh my gosh. So it's so
Wow.
crazy how one video can just, change so much. And yeah, I mean, I could also attest to the power of social media because that's how my business grew as well. That's where all of my clients have found me. That's how the podcast has grown. And yeah, it is as much as to your point where we live in this digital era, as much as we can be really addicted to our phones, there's also a lot of positivity that comes from this ability to be connected in a way that in Frida's time, that was not possible,
Oh
right?
yeah, 100%. And one of the interesting things for me was that like I always dreamed that when my book came out, I was going to be like at Barnes and Noble with this like book launch event, signing books. And then my book came out during the pandemic. So everything that I did and all my promotion and like launch events and stuff like that were all virtual. But it ended up really being a blessing because I think, obviously like people were at home and I think like reading more. And then also like people were actually tuning into Instagram lives and joining like Zoom events with authors and like doing, things that they may not have normally otherwise. And so I think that like now there also is more of a precedent for like people to engage online and on social media and just say, oh, because I listened to this podcast or because I like saw this girl on Instagram live. I think that people are also a lot more open to getting book recommendations or hearing about books or just like cool things to read from social media.
Yeah, definitely. And, as we're talking about social media, I think there's also an importance of just overall community. And what I was thinking about earlier when you said that a former colleague was the one that connected you to the publisher, like how amazing to have a community that and you've built this community, you've created the people around you. But can you maybe just talk a little bit about the power of networking and connecting with people and putting yourself out there? Because a lot of times we hear the phrase of it's not what you know but who you know, and I think that Yeah, it's what you know, but it really is also who you know, because those are the people that are going to recommend you and open the doors for you. So for maybe people who feel a little introverted, or maybe who were like you when you were younger and were more to themselves, like what advice do you have for people to put themselves out there, whether it's on social media or networking events?
Let me tell you something. Like, one thing that I think about almost all the time is just I feel like my career, my trajectory would have never happened if it wasn't for people I met along the way who helped me or helped me get my foot in the door. The number one story that I think of is, so I went to Penn State and I studied journalism there. And while I was at Penn State, I had decided with the support of my parents that I wanted to be a journalist. And because it was okay, you can't just be an author full time. That's not really a job. So journalism was like the way that I decided to go. And so I studied journalism. But for me, my dream was always to work in magazines. It was like this glamorous world that I was like, only ever saw on TV. But I was like, I never saw people who look like us working in magazines. So I decided I was going to kind of go the newspaper route. So I was getting ready to graduate, and I had an internship lined up through this internship program called at the New York Daily News, the newspaper here in New York. And it was my senior year, and at a scholarship dinner that I was at, the publisher of 17 magazine was the guest speaker. She was a Penn State alum. And as she was talking, like the whole time I was just super starry-eyed, and I was like, oh my God, how can I be like this woman? Like, she's amazing. Like, she has the dream job, like working for 17. Wow. And so after she got off the stage, something just literally came over me. And I literally saw at some point that she went to the bathroom, and I followed her into the bathroom. And I was just like pretending that I had to wash my hands, and I was just happened to be there at the sink, and she was there next to me. And we just started talking, and I was like, I'm actually going to be moving to New York after graduation. I'm going to be at the New York Daily News. I would love to, if you would consider having coffee with me sometime. She gave me her business card. Fast forward, when I moved to New York, I followed up. We ended up having lunch, and she kind of became like a mentor to me. And at one point, there was an internship opening at Oprah Magazine, and that it's owned by the same company as 17. So I reached out and I was like, hey, I applied for this. If there's any way you could put in a good word, I'd really appreciate it, which she did. And, I'll never know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that helped get my resume to the top of the pile. And I ended up getting an internship at Oprah Magazine, which literally kickstarted my whole like media career and just like getting into magazines and the trajectory I was on. And that was literally just because I found the like courage, even though I was super nervous, to go up to this person and stalk her in the bathroom and ask her for a business card. But I think that like I have a lot of stories like that. I think it's just like kind of, I think sometimes when an opportunity presents itself or a person presents themselves, we can be shy, or we can feel, oh, I don't want to come across as like icky, or I don't want to come across as like I'm trying too hard. But it's also like, you never know when that opportunity is going to come again. You never know if someone like that is going to cross your path. So I definitely think that, what's the worst that can happen? She thinks you're crazy, or she says no, or she doesn't want to give you her card. Okay, then like you move on with your life. So I think for me, like anytime you feel that like you want to try to connect with someone, or there's someone you admire, like reaching out to them, whether it's on social media or in person or at networking events, just putting yourself out there can really like truly go a long way.
Definitely. Yes. Oh, I love that story. Following somebody into the restroom.
I mean, I
I've done
don't
that.
recommend, don't stalk someone in the bathroom all the time. I don't know if that's always the advice, but I think the moral of the story is that I think there was something within me that was like, I cannot let this person leave without trying to at
Exactly.
least make a connection. And so I saw my window and I took it.
Yeah, and I've done that too. When I worked in tech, I saw somebody and at that time I was in sales, and I followed this lady into the bathroom, and when we were washing our hands, I was like, "Hi," and I just kind of
Yeah.
sparked the conversation. Of course, I'm like trembling, which, as I think about your trajectory and I think about the different choices that you've made in your life, I'm not sure if you shared this at the conference or if I heard this elsewhere, but you also interviewed Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah.
And for a long time, we're just behind the scenes and behind the camera. And I guess my point is that as I've seen your trajectory, you've always really led boldly. And when I think of my trajectory, I've always really led with courage, which now I run a program called Courage Driven Latina. So
Yeah.
all of this to then ask you, people will look at you as the author of this book and all of your accomplishments and maybe think, oh, being bold is easy for Arianna. It's not a big deal.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about that, because to step into boldness, it's not that it's difficult once, it keeps being difficult. So can you shed a little bit of light on that?
I think for me, a lot of it was like I just had to kind of do some mental trickery with myself, which is I think a lot of it was just kind of almost like coaching myself and just realizing like when opportunities would put themselves in front of me, or I would find myself in certain situations. I think that One of my favorite lessons that I have learned from Frida that really just stuck with me is, on the last painting that she painted before she died, she knew she was dying. She wrote on this painting, Viva la vida. And like, even still, she knew she was dying. She was like very, like, on her way out the door, was dealing with so much pain. She still was all about like just celebrating life and this one life that we get and this like one opportunity that we have to be here, right? So for me, I think I'm always just thinking about, yes, I could be shy. Yes, I could turn down the opportunity to interview Hillary Clinton. Or yes, I could say, oh, I don't know, I feel very intimidated and I don't want to write a book. Or, yes, I could, there's like a million ways that I could just opt out of things because I feel shy, or I get a pit in my stomach, or I get butterflies. But I think for me, the driving force has always just kind of been like, you get one life. And I think that, if there's a dream that's within you or something that you see for yourself, not giving yourself every single opportunity and chance to go after it while you are here on this planet, I think that's the greatest gift that you can give to yourself. So I definitely get nervous. I definitely get shy. I definitely sometimes I'm like, how did I end up here? I get imposter syndrome, all those things. But then I'm like, you know what? I'm here. Like Hillary Clinton's in front of me. So I'm going to do the best freaking job that I possibly can, even though I'm hella nervous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, and, I think sometimes we avoid the nerves and we avoid the scary feeling, but a lot of times there's magic in that too, because that means that you care, and so if something
Yeah.
scares you, let that be kind of that guiding force of, "Oh, I should do this because I'm terrified."
Yeah, that's such great advice. And I think that's something I've always thought of too, even when it comes to like your career and work. And like a lot of times people feel very fearful about taking a new opportunity or leaving their job to do something else, or they're afraid to like, expand their family or whatever it is. But I think that if something is scary to you, it's probably because it's something that really is exciting to you. And there's a lot of unknown, but there's a beauty in that too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, another question that I actually had at the beginning and I totally skipped over it, but so are you a journaler? Do you journal or do you do creative writing? I'm curious if you have any daily writing practices that you do maybe in the morning or in the evenings.
I don't. It's one of those things that I would love to do, but I think because for my day job and also like kind of my side hustle of writing books, I think that like when I do have free time to myself, I end up kind of just not wanting to write and not wanting to journal. But one thing that I have been trying to get more into is meditation, because I do feel like, I oversee a website I'm in news, I'm in media. And so I'm constantly, in addition to like my personal life and just liking to be on social media, I also am like
Mhm.
always plugged into what's happening in the world. So for me, it's more about just like I'm trying to be better about in the mornings, especially just like taking a moment for like gratitude and to just like completely turn my brain off. And I also feel like one of the reasons I love reading so much is that I feel like reading is also kind of like meditative for me, because it's like completely just escaping into another world and just like enjoying that act of reading versus seeing what's happening in the news, working, scrolling through my phone, like all those things. So I'm not a journaler. I don't really have a writing practice other than I feel like I try to save my creative energy towards like my book that I'm working on.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I mean, I've never been in your shoes with your type of job, but not only are you plugged in, but I assume it is very high pressure. So, how do you manage stress? You oversee a lot of people as well. So, how do you build the confidence and keep your nervous system regulated? I mean, maybe it's what you just mentioned, the meditation as well as reading, but how do you unplug from such a demanding job?
Yeah, I mean, it is high pressure. I'm not gonna lie, it is. And I think that especially the more senior that I've gotten, the more it's, at the end of the day, like the buck stops with me and if things go wrong or something happens. So I think that for a while in my career, I definitely struggled a lot with that like work-life balance and like always feeling like I had to be on and always feeling like even on the weekends or if I was out with friends, I was just constantly checking email and all those things. So some of it is that I think that I've had to just even in work situations try to build my teams and hire people that I know that I can trust and just make sure that I have a really good infrastructure in place where everything's not falling on me. So, for instance, when I was at Oprah, I had a much smaller team. And because I myself had launched the site, I just had so much more invested. And so it was like every waking moment, I was just constantly checking in and constantly like worrying about numbers and what's happening and all the things. Versus now, I feel like I have a bit of a bigger team and I have like number twos that I really trust and they have their own teams that they have their good systems with. So I feel like just a really smart setup where I feel like I can breathe a little bit easier. But that being said, I mean, I think the pressure is always going to be real and like kind of like high stakes, but my big like ways that I unplug and just try to keep my mental health together. I take long walks with my dog. Love my dog Leo. Lots of cuddles and walks with my puppy Leo. And then yeah, reading like really helps me to escape and just turn my brain off and just remember that there are worlds out there other than what's happening with me myself. And then I also am a big sleeper. I love if I don't get like my 8 hours of sleep, like it's a wrap for me. So I feel like sleep is also something that's just so underrated but really important. If I get like a good night's rest, I had a little bit of time to read before I went to bed, I like unplugged a little bit, then I'll feel a lot better and centered when I wake up in the morning.
Yeah, definitely. It was earlier this week and I was like, why am I so irritable today? And I didn't know why. And then I looked at my app that tracks my sleep and I was like, well, no wonder I got 6 hours of sleep. And that night I got a good night's rest and I just felt like such a new person. So you're right. I think in this hustle culture where people are just looking to get to places as quick as possible in their career and as young as possible in their career, this we almost discount the sleep like, oh, I could function on 4 hours of sleep. What is, do you want to? You're not
Yeah.
working at your highest capacity. Yeah, so I think prioritizing sleep, you're right, it's so underrated, but it's really a game.
Yeah, 100%. And I recognize that I'm like, I feel like I have that privilege because I don't have kids yet. And I'm like, oh, it's just me. So, I'm also just recognizing too that I'm trying to make the most of where I am in my life right now in my life. I'm in my mid 30s and my biggest responsibility is my dog. But, I'm trying to also just like really lean in this moment that like, I love my career. I have the time now to like work on a book. Maybe in a few years that'll be different. You know what I mean? So I'm also, I think that always just kind of aware of just hustling, but also like enjoying this time and the space that I am in my life currently.
Yeah, exactly. So when can we, not to put any pressure on you, but when can we expect your novel?
We'll see. I mean, yeah, let's hope, let's be ambitious and say sometime next year, but we'll see. Because
Okay,
the way it kind of, yeah, the way it kind of works is that I'm working on a manuscript and then I basically will have to work with my agent to try to see if we can sell it. And then most likely, if it does get sold, fingers crossed, then it's like a whole editing process with your publisher and it's a whole thing. So fingers crossed for sometime next year, but maybe I'll come back on the podcast when it's
that's exactly what I was going to say. We're going to invite you back as soon
I
as
just
that
invited
is.
myself. I invited myself back.
You are always welcome. Is there anything that I did not ask you that you might want to share with the listeners?
I think like the only other thing that comes to mind, like when you were talking about just like putting yourself out there and connecting with people, one of the things that I have found that I think is just so, and I think this is like how you and I connected, is that I find that there is nobody more supportive than Latinas and women of color. I feel if you want to feel good about yourself, if you need some encouragement, if you want people who are going to support your projects or help you get the word out there, I just feel like anytime I've needed support or, wanted to get the word out or needed a favor of like asking someone if they would post about my book or whatever it is, I just feel like it's always been like a yes, from whether it's somebody that I met once or somebody that I only know from Instagram. So I just love that I feel like in our communities, like we're just so supportive of each other. And I would just encourage anybody who's listening to not be afraid to reach out to that badass Latina that was on your podcast or that you've been following for forever, or who you've noticed like loves the same type of books as that like you're writing about and want to see if they're interested. I feel like the community that I feel like we're a part of and that we can lean on, like that is just such a treasure and something that I think people should really just think about and lean on.
I could not agree more. So, for those of you listening, don't be afraid to slide into somebody's DMs.
Yeah.
That's how so many of my friends now and I got acquainted. I feel like I built some of the strongest bonds through the pandemic and didn't meet these people in real life until a few years later. So yeah, whether you're at a conference or especially like at the amazing conferences that we were both at where it was very focused on women of color, but you're right, we are the biggest advocates for one another. So I couldn't agree with that more. So where can people connect with you and find you?
Yeah, so best place is probably Instagram. That's where I'm always on. It was just at Arianna, ARIANNAGAB, Arianna Gab. And I'm also on TikTok, Twitter, all the places. And then What Would Frida Do is available wherever you buy your books.
Amazing. Well, we will have all of that linked down below. And I can't wait to see you in person again so we could have another Tea Circle episode and catch up on all of the
I'm
stuff going on.
dying. I know you. Whenever you're in New York or I'm in LA, like it's gonna happen one of the two sooner rather than later. So I'm gonna hit you up.
Yes, exactly. And then once your novel is out, if there's anything that we can do, please let me know
Let me
because
think. I'm like, okay, this is giving me good. This is giving me good inspo to go home tonight and get some writing done. So
but I'm really looking forward to it. I think for a long time I was really stuck on obviously I'm into self-development. So I was very stuck on the self-help books. But the more that I've gotten into reading, and I actually, now I'm going on a tangent here, but I think I am undiagnosed, slightly dyslexic, and that has prevented me from writing. But I am a journaler and I actually really like writing. And when I was a kid,
Ooh.
I would write poetry. So now you were on the podcast. I also had a few other authors on the podcast. And I'm like, I feel like the universe is just nudging me to, Erica, start writing again. So not only have I started writing a lot more, but also I've gotten into reading fiction. And so I'm just very excited for your novel as well, because you're right. It takes us into another world and it just expands our imagination and I think our potential for manifesting as well.
Yeah, I feel like so much, whether I realize it or not, just like books and characters that I've read and then I've gotten to know on the pages of a book. So read, if you're listening to this and you don't, read some books.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it's the audiobook, and yours is available in the audio version as
It is,
well.
yeah, and it's also available in Spanish, or if you speak Dutch, it's available in Dutch. It's in Portuguese too. It's in a couple, specifically in English and Spanish. So, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, great. We will link all of your links down below. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and spending some time with us. And I've just got to say, we talked about a lot. You were very concise and to the point, and you were just such a good speaker as well.
Well,
So
you're a
thank
great
you.
interviewer. I was literally gonna say, I'm like, I love your podcast. I think I told you after we hung out in Puerto Rico, I like went back to the archives, and I think your podcast is so dope. But also, I was like, I love being interviewed by you. We could just talk all day. It's just like a little coffee chat, a little coffee.
Amazing. Oh, thank you so much. I received that. Thank you. I appreciate you so, so much. And I can't wait to see you in person again.
Me too. Let's hang. Let's do it. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Make sure to visit theericacruz.com. That's Erica with a K, where you can subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. You can help this podcast grow by supporting me with an Apple Podcast rate and review. If you took anything away from this episode, I invite you to take a screenshot and share it on social media so that your favorite badass Latinas can also check it out. Be sure to tag me at the Erica Cruz. That's Erica with a K, because you know I want to see it. If you're ready to join the revolution and be a part of the Courage Driven Latina community, visit couragedrivenlatina.com to get more information and join the waitlist. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.